Hello, Mark.
Hi, Gabby. Busy Champions League week.
Yeah, an interesting one. I mean, I was desperate to get to St James's Park to do a Champions League game this season, and it ended up being, as you know, a bit of a dead rubber because obviously Newcastle brought back a 6-1 scoreline from Qarabag and then scored 2 goals in the first 6 minutes. So it was all over, really. But I loved being back in Newcastle. Got quite sentimental about it. Went for a walk in the morning over the bridges and came back and had breakfast with John Champion, the commentator, and I started crying.
Did you?
Did you? I got all teary. He didn't quite know what to do with me. I said, I love this place so much. So, yeah. I'm glad. I'm very, very glad that we, have got as far as we've ever got in the Champions League and we're through to the last 16. But a bit more jeopardy next time would be lovely.
Well, you would have thought there will be jeopardy next time, won't there? I mean, Barcelona or Chelsea in the last 16. By the time you're listening to this, if you're listening after Friday morning, you will know who they are facing. But after a very long league stage and this sort of playoff stage, we are set for some brilliant ties. We could get Manchester City, Real Madrid again, couldn't we, as well?
We could, which I don't want.
You don't want?
No, because it feels like we had it 5 times in the last.
Yeah, but I also know why you don't want it, because the other option for Manchester City, because they're all in these brackets, so it's an either or for every team. Their other option is Bodo Glimt.
Yes, and you know how much I want to go there. And that's genuine. It sounds like I'm being sarcastic.
I know.
The only thing is, it'll just be that bit warmer. Which, you want it as kind of cold and Arctic Circle-y as possible. But I'd love to. I loved the first leg of their game against Inter. Obviously, last week was fantastic. But I would love to go up there. I've got a feeling we won't be going there, though, because there are so many English teams involved that...
Yeah, but if that's the Tuesday night and City are away to Bodo Glimt, look, I'll keep banging the drum as well on your behalf. That has to be, as you say. There are others there that, if it's Newcastle Chelsea, well, that's just all
there's a
Premier
chance
League.
if it is that. Well, not a chance. If it is that, Newcastle will play Chelsea 3 times in 7 days. So, it's not rare, is it, that fixture?
Not going to do that. So Tottenham and Liverpool could get Atletico Madrid or Galatasaray. Well,
Liverpool have already played Galatasaray this season.
Yeah, exactly. So Arsenal, it's Atalanta or Bayer Leverkusen. They've played Atalanta in the past, I'm sure, and probably Bayer Leverkusen. There you go. It's all set up. There you go.
Yeah,
Boom.
I'm off to the Arctic Circle. Busy week for you as well, I know. Have you had your eye on England's performance in the T20?
Do you know, I sort of have and I haven't really, and because it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're going to talk Drive to Survive in a moment, and a sports format and how it operates, and how big it is, how small it is, the bubble it operates in. And parts of this men's T20 World Cup have been quite interesting. Some of the associate nations have done well, and you can see improvement there. But you had 4 groups of 5 to start with, and then the top 2 go through, and now you have 2 groups of 4 again, and then you'll get down to semi-finals and a final. So it's elongated. And the other thing is, it's also slightly skewed by who refuses to play who where. And I'm basically talking India, Pakistan, but there's no Bangladesh there as well. So there are all these sorts of caveats and restrictions. So actually in this Super 8 group, 2 Super 8 groups, you've got 3 of the teams that finish first in the group in one, and 3 of the teams that finish runners-up in another, which is actually England's group. So sometimes I just wonder about, because of all the politics that comes into it, how sort of actually fair it is at the moment. But having said all of that, Harry Brook hit a century the other day for England against Pakistan, which was, out of this world. It was just a sensational century. He was moved up the order. He batted 3. He's England captain. He's had an awful lot of stick recently, partly through how he gets out, partly through various other things that have gone on off the field and being in a bar and so on and so forth before the Ashes in a one-day series and whatever. But so I was really pleased for him. I was really, really pleased for him. And it was a century to behold. So at the end of all of that, I have quite mixed feelings about this tournament. But England's men are in another T20 semi-final, and they have a chance to win it.
Remember, you can catch up on previous episodes on YouTube, Global Player, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe or follow and leave a review for us if you can. And you can get in touch on socials at The Sports Agents or email thesportsagents@global.com.
So next up, from Drive to Survive and the F1 movie with Brad Pitt, it's executive producer Ian Holmes and motorsport journalist Will Buxton, who hosts Global's new F1 podcast, Up to Speed.
OK, let's talk all things Drive to Survive. Ian Holmes is with me in the studio, who's the exec producer. Will Buxton, friend of the podcast, is in LA. Good morning to you, Will.
Good morning.
Let's get going then on the idea and kind of where it came from. And when you first, unless it was your idea, when you first heard the idea proposed, whether you could have foreseen what this would do to the fan base and popularity of F1.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories about where this came from, but I think I'm in a position to tell you the real one. But essentially, soon after our current owners, Liberty Media, bought Formula One, we were approached initially by another well-known streaming platform who had another brand of programming, wanting to make some sort of behind-the-scenes type series focused on a team, which tended to be that was their sort of USP. They've done it in football, they've done it in other sports, but essentially it was focused on
Prime Video.
Couldn't possibly comment, but yeah, focusing on a particular team. So we were talking to them, and partly as a result of Liberty's recent purchase, they were keen to make sure that perhaps if we pursued this type of a programming option, the whole grid. All the teams were given sort of exposure. Mm-hmm. We suggested this to the company, the streaming company, and they understandably they had a brand, a particular style, and they weren't so keen. So we thought, well, let's talk to another well-known streaming platform, Netflix, and we suggested the idea of something, but effectively covering the whole grid, all of the teams. And they were interested, and that's effectively where it originally came from.
It's interesting you mentioned the other streaming platform and their sort of behind the scenes documentaries, because I'm assuming we're talking all or nothing. So there are some of those that are absolutely I have found fascinating when I've watched, and some I think have been terrible and tedious, and I don't believe them for 1 second. So what makes Drive to Survive the success it is?
I think there's a couple of very key components. I think firstly, we're dealing with a small cast, 20 drivers, now 22 going forward, 10 team principals. And to be fair, when we were first talking about this, I don't think anyone quite realised that the team principals would provide such interesting, compelling content, but effectively you're dealing with 30 people then. Yeah. Obviously we have a new team coming this year. One or two other people, but really 20 drivers, 10 team principals. So you unlike let's say a football team or a bigger series, take something like the tennis, for example, or the PGA Golf Tour, or even the participants in something like the Tour de France. That's a much bigger, let's call it a cast. So it's quite a narrow cast, which allowed the production to really focus on everyone in quite an in-depth way. So I think that initially was and remains an important element. And I'd say the other thing is that we spent a long time negotiating the contract, both with Netflix and obviously with the teams. Without the team's buy-in, it's impossible to make. A lot of the filming takes place in areas and at times that effectively belong to the teams, or the drivers. So we spent a lot of time, discussing and negotiating what could be captured, how it would be produced, and what sort of rights the teams had in regard to reviewing and or requesting changes. And I'd say that we, through a combination of probably luck more than design, we enabled a situation where we agreed on some very defined but quite narrow categories where things could be changed. But what that effectively meant was that the series, I'd like to think anyway, the series is very honest.
Unfiltered at times.
Yes, unfiltered. Of course, we have to respect, these are big businesses, and we absolutely don't want to bring anyone into disrepute. But at the same time, we wanted to have something that felt honest. And times revealing some things that perhaps some
I think that
wouldn't
is
want.
the key, Will, isn't it? That there are many reasons why it has been such a success. Season 8, congratulations, and your involvement in it, Will, as well. And I'm sure you have felt that the growth in terms of what you do around F1 and have reaped the rewards of that, because it has taken Formula One to a different audience as well, that so many other sports will be completely jealous of. And yet, when you describe the cast there, because one of those audiences is women, the number of women watching F1, it's a very male-dominated cast, in terms of the drivers, in terms of the owners. But there is something of the drama, I think, that draws people in who haven't had any previous knowledge of the sport. They're able to kind of access it in a way that they can't access other sports.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, the growth of the sport has been, vast under Liberty Media's ownership. Drive to Survive has obviously been an absolutely massive part of that. And what's lovely is I remember being at some races, and you'd get people sort of coming up and saying, "Oh, we love Drive to Survive," and I said, "Oh, God, great! Really, really glad you're enjoying it." And I say, "Are you enjoying the current season of racing?" And they'd say, some of them would say, "Oh, we're not watching racing. Don't spoil it for us. We're waiting for the next season of Drive to Survive." Some people watch it purely as as an entertainment series, but the vast majority have had it as this access point to a sport which we've loved for decades, and it was about opening this sport up and making people feel included. And Ian's very modest about obviously his involvement in Liberty Media's real, I think, vision in bringing this documentary to the fold. The word luck is used a lot about the success of Drive to Survive because of how it unfolded. But we all know, in sport and in life, luck is where opportunity meets. Where preparation meets opportunity. And if Liberty hadn't have prepared in the way that they did, if they hadn't have put the groundwork in the way that they did, then that opportunity, when it arose, which ostensibly was within COVID, and when people were locked down at home and had nothing to do and were really devoid of meeting new people, along came this series and this incredible cast of characters and this beautiful mode of storytelling, and people felt connected. And Liberty, at the same time, along with the FIA, had managed to work along a scenario where Formula One continued through the pandemic. So they were able to watch this series and then watch the racing. And that created this groundswell for this series, in which suddenly all sports said, we need a Drive to Survive. It wasn't we need a sports documentary. We need a Drive to Survive. And it became this byword.
It must get mentioned at least twice a month on this show when we talk to other sports and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to grow. But interestingly, Will, just going back to the point of those people who've said, well, we're watching the documentary, but we're not watching the racing. How is the sport measuring its growth in terms of eyeballs on the racing? I get how the success of Drive to Survive is measured through Netflix, but how is F1 itself look at measuring the rise in its audiences?
I think that's probably a question for Ian, who will know far better than I.
He's nodding knowingly.
The real world consequences. But I think you only need to look at the investment that's taken place in Formula One over the last decade, and in particular over the last 8 years. You look at the influx of sponsors, particularly those who've come from the United States, which we know is one of the areas where Drive to Survive has had its greatest burst of popularity. That wouldn't have happened, I don't think, without this series and without the global kind of magnifying lens that it's given the sport.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously track our data, track our fans. You can't always tell exactly why someone sits down and watches. If they do watch, but we gather a certain amount of information. It might be something as simple as understanding, asking them to explain why they watch a race. But what we have seen in particular, and it's already been mentioned, is the particular increase in fans in the US, big market where we were very, very small, and we're still rather modest, but certainly a lot bigger than we were. But Drive to Survive, we know, has been particularly impactful in that market. And also younger viewers. We're one of probably the only mainstream sport whose audience is getting younger and more female skewed. And whilst not entirely, certainly Drive to Survive accounts for a large part of that. Viewership in terms of who watches races can be a fickle thing. It depends on who you've sold the rights to. Could be other things. Will mentioned COVID, which had both positive and negative impacts on audiences, depending on the sport and whether they were running or not running. But certainly we know for a fact that Drive to Survive has been important. Not the only thing, but important.
Do the traditional fan base, do they mind the newbies?
That's a very good question. Look, there's been a certain amount of speculation about the series, and is it made up? Are there stories that are coaxed out?
Some of them, it does at times appear, wow, this is fortunate, this is very lucky. Is the dog wagging the tail?
Look, our position on this, and it's been fairly well documented. There's nothing that's made up. Nonetheless, there is a certain amount of screen time where a narrative has to get told. And therefore, which may be a narrative that takes place from, we're about to go racing next week and we'll finish in December. So it could be a 10-month narrative, but it needs to be told in half an hour. So in order to tell that story, it needs to be edited accordingly. Nonetheless, the story is the story. But back to your question about the existing fans, yes, they watch it for sure. They may have different opinions on it. One thing that we say sort of internally or amongst the teams is that the series is not for the people that occupy the paddock. And I'm sure Will can agree to this. It's not necessarily for the people that occupy the paddock or work in the sport. It's really designed to be as inclusive as possible, and therefore, by definition, it requires some explanation as to what the sport is. It's a complex sport. Whilst there may be a particular narrative, it could be about two drivers challenging each other, but there are certain elements that need to be explained, because we do know that there are people that are watching the sport that aren't necessarily familiar with the rules or the point scoring, etc., etc. Now, maybe there's some elements of that where if you're an established, knowledgeable fan, you might find
you don't want to feel like you're being kind of told how to suck eggs.
Exactly. So there's a delicate balance on that front.
When it comes to the stories, then, Ian, do you can't arrive you said you were flying to Melbourne tomorrow, I think. You can't just arrive in Melbourne and start shooting and hope that stories develop, or do you? Or do you have a sense going into a new season of, right, well, actually, we want to focus on Adrian Newey at Aston Martin, so that whatever happens, that will be a story. I'm sort of guessing how much you storyboard, how much is organic.
Okay, so I don't want to overplay my role in deciding the narrative, but essentially, Box to Box, who make the series, with our input and Netflix's input, they will spend time pre-season and at various points during the season trying to ask themselves and the teams exactly that question, trying to come up with some ideas of what the narrative might be for them across the year. You can see it in the sense of at a particular race, they will have a crew that's perhaps embedded with a particular team because they're planning on following a narrative. They'll also have one or two crews that are floaters that will be able to pick up on anything else that is going on that perhaps wasn't foreseen before the event took place. So, you mentioned a good point. Adrian Newey's car, the new Aston Martin, that's his first car for Aston Martin. So that in itself would be an element of a story. It's important to note that the story is that the series is not about engines and tyre compounds and things like that, but for sure, just from a logistics point of view, that there has to be some ideas beforehand. And when you think about it, there's some fairly obvious things that you could do. If a team has a new driver or has lost a driver, or there's been a few off-track things that have been a focus at various points, which often in the news that are known about.
And those things that maybe the elephant in the room here, those big stories that break, that could be quite controversial and scandalous even. Are they now an opportunity for you, where previously you might have thought differently about those things and the reputation of the sport? Do they now look like opportunity?
In short, yes. using the word opportunity, not necessarily, sometimes it's a sort of negative connotation. But look, it's about what we quickly realised for the series is that people are interested in people. And I think you've seen that all the way through the series, in that some of the most followed, liked, enjoyed personalities aren't necessarily the people that are winning championships and races. You know, there's plenty of examples, and probably someone like Gunther Steiner would be one of those who, let's face it, before Drive to Survive, although he's been involved in the sport in lots of different...
particularly well known.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And, you know, some of the drivers that have perhaps lent in more than others. But people are interested in people. So, you know, whilst we need to be respectful of privacy and so on and so forth, but these are stories. You know, if you're talking about a driver, it could be, you know, it needs to be sensitive. If it's a man at the moment, it would be great if we have some female drivers. But you know, if it's a young man, you know, in his late teens, being given an opportunity, there's a huge amount of pressure on him. That in itself is a story. He's probably been driving a go-kart since he's 4 or 5 years old. So with sensitivity, of course, we're going to pick up on elements sort of away from the track, and Formula One has always had that. That sort of storylines behind it.
And that's actually what I was going to say to you, Will, was that it's very easy to go, well, since we've had Drive to Survive, you know, there's plenty more soap opera, for want of a better term, within the sport. And then actually, if you know the history of the sport, all you have to do is go, well, Prost Senna, that didn't have Drive to Survive, did it? But that was it has always been there. Oh my God, could you imagine? Yeah. Could you imagine?
Yeah. You know,
is it possible to do a prequel?
It is with AI.
You know what's in the vault, Ian. You know what's in the vault. It probably is possible to do a prequel. But no, it's, you know, so much of what makes this show a success, I think, and as Ian has said, you know, is people. And ultimately, it's their stories and telling their stories. That's what's made this thing a success, because people are hungry to know more about the drivers. You know, I got involved with the sport 25 years ago, and politics was a huge part of the sport. What was going on behind closed doors with Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley, and how they ran the sport, and how the teams kind of faced that. And at periods where maybe the racing wasn't as exciting as it is today, politics was the headlines for Formula One. We don't have so much of that these days. It's very much the on-track action and the on-track personalities that have created what Drive to Survive is. And Ian's very modest, but when you look at this current season, there's a number of the storylines in there which, you know, had to be thought about before the season started. You know, they followed the rookie drivers. You know, we knew before the season started that Jack Doohan was on thin ice and potentially only had about 5 races to prove his worth in Formula One. And so they made sure that they were with Jack on the weekend where potentially it was going to be, and ultimately ended up being his last race. You know, that kind of thing doesn't happen by chance. There has to be some planning that goes into that. And I think they do a great job of it.
And following on from that, then, in that situation, if I was Jack Doohan, I'm not sure, Ian, I'd really want you around, with all due respect. And I mean, I have to say, I couldn't think of anything worse than having a camera pointed at me whilst trying to do my job. I know that sounds ridiculous, but to give you some context, they did it behind the scenes.
Media.
I know, but they did it behind the scenes of Match of the Day about 2 weeks into the new season. And whenever the camera was anywhere near in the office, I just stopped talking in the hope that I wouldn't be in this documentary. Anyhow, has anybody the
host hope he's not part of the show?
I know. Did you have to convince people? Did people say no? The buy-in of everybody is. I mean, is it financial? Is that what it boils down to?
Look, I think I mentioned it earlier. We have hugely benefited from the cooperation of the teams, and by definition, the drivers. They very quickly bought into this series. We're lucky enough to have success, not straight off the bat. It was really sort of between series 2 and 3 where it really jumped up, when most series tend to sort of continue to dwindle. So, you know, respect should go to the teams for their foresight. There's always a financial angle. They don't get paid for Drive to Survive per se, but in the broader,
it doesn't harm with brands, does it? Though.
Yes, with the broader interest. I mean, Ferrari and Mercedes famously didn't participate in Series 1, which is fair enough. They didn't. didn't really know what to expect. They were both that year involved in the battle for the championship and wanted to focus on that. They very quickly agreed to participate in Series 2. And whilst I can speculate what might have gone on behind closed doors, but I would imagine that their partners were quite keen to enjoy that sort of
and now
extra
it's normal,
exposure.
isn't it? You know, you're on season 8, so anybody coming into the sport understands this is almost part. You can't see a life without it almost.
Yeah.
And as Chap has said, we talk about this fairly regularly when we talk to other sports who are trying to look at ways that they can grow their audiences, the ways they can develop their competitions. And rugby had its opportunity with a Netflix series, and knowing some of the stories behind that just didn't give enough access, I think, in terms of making it a success. And I'm sure it is absolutely kind of kicking itself in how that ended up being dropped for the second season. Other sports are desperate, aren't they, Will, to replicate this kind of growth, and especially with young audiences and female audiences. So your advice then, you're advising another sport on how they can take a drive to survive and make their sports grow.
Don't do it. Don't do it. No, but seriously though, because you can't copy it. And people have tried, and people have failed. And Ian made the point earlier, what led to the incredible global rise of Formula One. Yes, Drive to Survive was a part of it, but there was so much else going on at the time. Liberty's push into the digital domain and making sure that eyeballs were on the sport across digital platforms was a huge part of the sport's growth, which ran hand in hand with Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive itself, as Ian said, only really found success between seasons 2 and 3 at a time when COVID happened and the sport was continuing. All of those circumstances combined together to create this incredible effect that you cannot replicate. So if you just try to copy and paste it, it's not going to work. The world's waiting now for what the next thing will be, for what sport or what entertainment sort of process will find something new and find something that engages in a new and different way. Because Drive to Survive is Drive to Survive. And when people said we need a Drive to Survive, you know exactly what they meant. But the circumstances surrounding that, you can't replicate it.
I also think as well, Ian, going back to your point of your cast as well, and you mentioned the golf one, which was also box to box, wasn't it? I think who did full swing? Is it full swing?
Full swing,
yeah, full swing. It's now impossible to tell a story fully, because there are so many people and so many events, and you have your own bubble that is quite controllable with the number of people that are in it, and that Will's point is right, isn't it?
And also,
there aren't other sports like
racing
that.
drivers seem to me, I've never worked in Formula One, but on watching the coverage, racing drivers seem unbelievably compliant and willing to talk at any point in their competitive day. Well, in terms of accessing them,
unless
before...
it's going very badly for.
Every
Lewis Hamilton interview I saw last season, he didn't look massively compliant.
No, but they still have to do the interviews, right?
Yeah.
So even though they don't want to, they're not shirking their media responsibilities. So they've been used to that. It's been part of their. They're growing up within the sport. They understand. It's not like in a football team where you can hide if it's not your thing. You can not be the one that's spoken to.
Yeah, and it's a good point. So outside of perhaps agreeing to a sit-down interview with the box-to-box crew for Drive to Survive, at various points over every race weekend, there are requirements for the drivers to participate in media interviews, which often provides quite a lot of content, because in order to make the series, there's obviously lots and lots of unilateral content that is captured by box to box. However, they also get hundreds and hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, from us, who are capturing the sport. Obviously, everything on track is caught by us, but the official interviews and various other things. So the source material is comprehensive. But back to the raw ingredients, as you said, we've got 20 now 22, drivers. Generally, they are intelligent, articulate. They've worked with the media probably for many, many years, despite being young. We're lucky enough to race in some attractive places. The backdrops are good. And there is this sort of travelling circus, to coin a cliche. They all rock up at, let's call it Wednesday, Thursday, and everyone is together in this paddock, in this working environment for 3 or 4 days. So if it's a game of football, I don't know how many hours before the game that a team typically turns up, but they turn up,
90.
they get changed, they go and play and leave. I think that there are some raw ingredients for our sport that lends itself to making this series particularly attractive.
Football doesn't need it per se, but has had some good examples, and obviously Wrexham is a great example of that, isn't it? In terms of apparently if you have a Wrexham story on the BBC Sport homepage, they get even when they were a couple of divisions lower, they get a ridiculous amount of hits compared to other teams in the division because of the popularity now globally of Wrexham.
Yeah, and I think that says it all. Obviously, they've got some very well-known, or one in particular well-known owner, but at the same time, it goes back to that sort of storyline of these sort of underdogs, if you like, this team that has been.
The cast of characters are not necessarily the people you think at the very beginning of a story like that might become the stars. Yeah, no,
this is true. So very often it is the underdog.
Are you thinking what next, Ian, in terms of what the next step is for growth, or are you thinking Drive to Survive can keep growing the sport because the storylines will always keep changing?
I think it would be foolish not to be thinking of what next. I don't think when we set out on this path, we had any expectation that we would be 8 series in from later tonight, and probably 9 going forward, and it'd be nice to get to magical 10. But we will continue to sort of put our efforts into Drive to Survive. There are some things that we have been discussing about how we can perhaps freshen things up, change some approaches. In the last couple of series, we tried in Series 7 for the Singapore Grand Prix. We had five drivers pretty much mic'd up for the duration, and they filmed most of the content themselves. So it was a slightly different approach. We've tried to do something similar for the series that's about to drop in Las Vegas with 4 team principals, something kind of similar. So the structure and narrative of Drive to Survive can evolve, and if people want to watch it, I mean, that's the brutal thing about this business. You soon find out if people don't want to watch it anymore. But so far, the numbers are holding up super well, really well. I mean, ridiculously well given the number of series. But absolutely, we're thinking about, and it's not necessarily instead of, it could be in addition to, but what is another interesting genre? I mean, completely different opportunity, but we were fortunate enough to enjoy the working with Apple and Jerry Bruckheimer for the F1 movie, and Brad Pitt, of course.
Would he make it, do you think, a younger Brad Pitt?
Who knows? He likes his bikes.
Okay. You said nothing, which means that he wasn't that good.
He loved it. By all accounts, he loved the driving.
Okay.
Absolutely loved the driving.
Was he any good?
He was.
Okay.
He was.
Could he have made it, do you think, in another life?
He was really good.
I've no idea.
Will said he's really good.
Yeah.
So when they started shooting, they started shooting the day before the SAG strike hit, and so then they had to kind of pause for a year. And Brad went off and just started driving F2 cars during the strike.
Oh, okay.
With a team in Formula 2 called Carlin, or used to be called Carlin, and the engineers and the mechanics and everybody on Carlin said, like, Brad could legitimately jump into Formula 2 right now and be pretty much midfield. Like, he's not going to be winning races, but he'd be mid-grid.
And
he'd
he's
be
like
competitive.
60.
Yeah, and he's good.
Wow.
No, I know he doesn't. Yeah.
God, that's depressing, isn't it?
It
really?
is, yeah.
Isn't it?
But it's an example, and sorry, big example. But we're continually looking at how we can be in a position to provide interesting, engaging content for people not necessarily want to sit down on a Sunday afternoon and watch a 2-hour race. There's a lot discussed about funnels and forcing or encouraging fans to come through the funnel and end up watching as much coverage as is available, and ultimately that's something that is most important to us. But at the same time, if we can provide content in different places for different people who want to watch it, want to engage with the sport in different ways, then it's our responsibility to do so.
So does it matter then? Does it matter, Ian, if someone says they love F1 but don't watch the race?
Absolutely not. If they start watching Drive to Survive and then become avid Formula One fans and want to watch all of the races and get up at 6 a.m. to watch the Australian Grand Prix, great. If all they ever do is watch Drive to Survive, which by the way is 7 or 8 hours of content, so it's not insignificant, and if that's where they are, ultimately great as well. The point is we need to provide content. We talked about building the sport. We need to provide content and understand that everyone is different, and people may want to engage in one way. They may be interested in the sort of off-track elements of the sport. Someone else is just very interested in the sort of engineering side of the sport. So it's important for us to provide engaging content
for everybody
in formats that people want to watch. We talked earlier, I heard people sort of say, don't tell me who wins this race. They're watching Drive to Survive, and you think, well, it's actually 8 months ago. But, whatever.
Will, obviously Up to Speed, your latest project, podcast, is another way of people accessing the sport. Where would you say that sits in the kind of the absolute keynotes, or those who've only come in through Drive to Survive in the last few years?
Excellent plug, Gabby. Thank you so much. It's we're all really excited about it, and bringing together David Coulthard and Naomi Schiff, myself, and Jolie Sharp. We represent 4 very different generations of people who have loved, followed, for DC's case, having raced and won in Formula One. And our hope is to bring our combined knowledge, understanding, experience within the sport to bear, to bring in fans of all generations. If you're brand new to the sport, if you've been watching it for 30 years, if you like, more of the kind of the Gen Z stuff that I don't really understand, there's a little bit of something in it, hopefully, for everyone. Because I think what Drive to Survive has really done is thrown the doors open on Formula One and embraced fans, whether they're new or old, to say, come and take a look at this wonderful sport, come and enjoy it with us. And that's what we hope the podcast will do as well, is be something and a safe space for everybody to enjoy the wonderful sport that is Formula One.
And how was Max Verstappen on the first one?
He was good, and you know what? So much of the feedback from it was, I really disliked this interview because I hated Max, and now I really like him. It was a lovely insight actually into the guy, and just he's very mindful, and he's far more mature than people give him credit for, and just this guy who is now a father, a 4-time world champion. Just his overall outlook on life was something that I think took a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah, one of the headlines that came out from that was that he might be coming towards the end of actually being in love with what he does, and actually the kind of prospect of being a family man and having a life away from the sport is not something that's far from his mind.
No, and he's been talking about it for a while, and I think you have to take him seriously on what he says. And
is it about hunger? Do you think, Will?
No, the hunger's
No.
the hunger's always there with Max. Like he exists to win. But what's lovely for him is he's achieved everything in his life that he ever wanted to. He's won the Formula One World Championship. He just wanted one of them. He's got 4 of them, so he could walk away now and be happy. And I think what's lovely is, that kind of, there's a certain realization that hits us at different parts of our lives as to what's really important, and it's hit Max, in his late 20s, and luckily I think he's done enough with his life, and he's made enough money in his life that he could walk off into the sunset tomorrow and live a very, very happy existence for the rest of his life with his family. What a lovely position to be in, What an incredible fortune to have that.
Well, thank you both for being on. Will, Ian, thank you.
I'm disappointed, chappers. I assumed there would be cameras and we would actually get into Series 9. I thought that's what this was all about.
You've already heard my thoughts on behind the scenes.
Actually, I can add to Chappers' story. I think for Series 1, they brought a camera crew up to our offices, the Formula One offices, and they wanted to film a meeting. So we had a meeting.
Fake meeting?
Yeah. Probably we would have had the meeting, but a little bit like Chappers. Actually, I was the opposite. I spent the whole time trying to think of something intelligent to say, but didn't say anything. And anyway, they quickly realised that we wouldn't be source material.
We were doing too many meetings.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much,
Brilliant.
guys. Unsurprisingly, very open and honest about what's made it a success, and which
Great
is being
stuff.
open and honest. I think.
Thank you. It's been great being on here.
Enjoy your season. Enjoy the
Thank you.
season.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any thoughts on today's show, on Drive to Survive, or on anything, in fact, well, not on anything. I don't want to hear your views on absolutely anything. The Sports Agents at global.com, or message us on social media, or via the link in the show notes.
Do you know what I'm doing on Friday?
No. To be honest, it's quite difficult to guess sometimes with you. So
You will never. I could sit you there for an hour, and you'd never get to this point.
go on
I'm
then.
filming on Friday ahead of the London Marathon coverage on the BBC with Daddy Pig at a track in West London. I'm not going to name where it is in case there are Daddy Pig fans who want to come along and watch this, because Daddy Pig is running the London Marathon, and it's part of the storyline. And I'm reporting on Daddy Pig's training as a piece to go into this. I mean, obviously, when this email landed, you can imagine how quickly I said yes.
So this interview that you do with Daddy Pig will be in Peppa Pig?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't got anybody in my world, because my kids are 20 and I haven't got grandchildren, obviously. I haven't got anybody in my world, really, who talks to me about Peppa Pig. But it's iconic for me. So, what
an amazing gig.
Yeah. So I'm going down there to experience the delights of Daddy Pig.
Right, hang on. And we've just done a whole episode on behind-the-scenes access and stuff. So... and now I'm fascinated in this. So is this, if you've got toddlers listening, turn this off, because I don't want to destroy the magic of Peppa Pig. Is this a man dressed as Daddy Pig?
You haven't, obviously I haven't filmed it yet, right? So I'm assuming there is a human and it's not a pig in the costume. I'm assuming it's a human in the costume.
Yes.
And there is an actor who has the voice.
Yes.
So I'm assuming the person I speak to tomorrow is the person whose voice is the one that we recognise. But maybe the person running the marathon is different to the person who is the actor. I don't know.
And then you're being drawn into the series. Are you being animated?
I'll find out more tomorrow. I mean, I've said yes just on the basis that it's Daddy Pig.
Yeah.
So I'll find out a bit more tomorrow. Whether or not this goes on some kind of platform in our build-up as well, I don't know. I hope I'm going to be drawn in. I mean, but then why would I need to be there? I don't know how they do it, but I'm just excited about going and meeting Daddy Pig.
You are right, though. It would have taken me quite a few guesses.
Remember, you can catch up with all our past episodes on YouTube, Global Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please make sure you subscribe or follow and leave a review.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.